Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I'll be taking you through the process I went through to paint up these, one of these 3D printed tanks that are based on models from the recently released, or relatively recently released, Battletech PC wargame. This particular tank in question is a Shrek PPC carrier that is a heavy triple barrel tank equipped with 3 PPCs and nothing else. Its purpose is to act as long-range standoff firepower against enemy mechs. So, let's get on with the, discussion of the model itself after it comes out of the printer. So to start with, you'll notice that one of them has some weird boxy constructs on the overhangs, and the other one doesn't. These are called rafts. They exist to help the print basically adhere to the print bed, and, well, the idea is you basically remove it once you've finished your print and you're ready to actually print off the model. So as you can see, they're very tenuously affixed to the model, so they can be pretty much peeled off. So the general process is you peel them off, then you use a hobby tool or knife file, whatever your preferred method of cleaning up miniatures is, to remove any excess debris. So I'll only be painting up one of these miniatures as well. Quite frankly, I still have yet to figure out exactly how armies in Alpha Strike are meant to go together and how to do list building, so I have no idea how much I'll actually need for the tabletop. So to foreground this, I've also practiced on a couple of other tanks. You'll see those at the end of the video. So we've done a basic undercoat, my usual method of a black initial coat, then a zenithal Corax white coat, and we'll start working on our base colors. Now you'll notice that I've got 3 in the background. So I've made my initial selection of base colors based on a rough equivalent of the NATO Cold War European camouflage. So you'll notice we've got 3, a very, very verdant green, a grey black, and a brown. So to start with, I'll get to work on base coatings, and the base coat of which will be the green. I also recommend looking to history for a variety of interesting camo patterns employed by a variety of militaries worldwide. Some of them may surprise you in terms of their colour palette choices and their creativity. So the base coating process is dead easy. I've already got some of the, I believe that's goblin green on the palette, which will act as my very lowest green color. And I'm just gonna I've got my largest, most beaten up brush, and I'm just gonna chuck it on the model. It'll take 2 thin coats because, like with game color and on my wet palette, it tends to go on very thin, so you'll need those additional coats if you paint anything like I do. And there we go. That's pretty much how easy it is to get the base coat on. We'll leave this dry and then we'll come back to it for another pass. Or rather, our first camouflage color. So we're working on our first camo color now. This color is a mix of Vallejo game color. I believe it's the black with a bit of shadow grey just to lighten it to get that grey-black color. So it's going on very thin and very watery, and I'm working it on in a spider-like pattern coming out from the center of the hull, and the same will be true for the turret when we get around to it. So the paint is going to go on very liquid, mostly again due to the nature of my wet palette, and this basically means we'll need 2 thin coats in order to get a consistent coverage. So when painting camo patterns, my usual method is, first of all, you lay down an initial coat just to get the shape of the pattern, then you do a second coat to firmly establish that shape. That being said, there are other ways of laying down this pattern. Like, for example, if you take inspiration from German camouflage patterns, stippling on colors, that is a relatively dry brush to make a pattern, also works. It's great for achieving a soft edge camouflage. Anyway, here we go. We've changed camera angles to something we can better see what I'm doing, and we've got our first coat of black down, and we're ready to more firmly establish the base coat with our second coat. So we'll just get a nice consistent load on the brush, and we'll start filling in the details. So there's not really much else to say about this process other than just take your time, be careful, and check the consistency of your paint and try to stay within the lines that you've already established. Alright, now that we've finished our black, let's move on to the brown. So if we take another look at our M1 Abrams, you'll notice that the brown tends to overlap with the black and the green. So we're going to try and replicate this, and it's also a significantly, in terms of the real estate on the tank, it occupies significantly less than both the green and the black. So the idea is I'm going to pick out various areas along the spiderweb camo and paint some brown blotches to try and replicate this effect. So again, due to my wet palette and the consistency of the paint, it'll go in very wet, so it'll require 2 thin coats in order to fully establish the camo pattern shapes that we're after. So for the track units, the detail on them is pretty much non-existent, so I'm not going to bother to paint it in myself, and since the majority of them, they're mostly hidden by the hull of the model, I'm just going to paint them a flat black to represent rubberized tracks that are pretty common on modern armored fighting vehicles. So again, 2 thin coats. It's a very, very, very thin paint that we're working with in this instance. Now, you can deviate from this stage and use transfers if you have access to them, but I don't, not for the scale and models that I want. So I'm just going to paint on some markings by hand, and to do this I'm using a very thin down a mix of, I think it's just off-white, Vallejo Game Color off-white, and I'm going to sketch on some numbers. So some simple markings which look believable are things like hull numbers. My usual method is I pick a random 3-digit number and just paint it on. In this case it's 117 after our favourite Spartan. Anyway, to get an even coverage, you just relayer the numbers until you're happy with the strength of the paint on the model. And on the opposite side of the model, I am taking, I'm ripping off what the British did in World War II, is I'm painting squadron and troop markings. So the way this worked in the World War II was that each each squadron was assigned a colour, I believe, and each troop within that squadron was assigned a shape. So, for example, blue squadron circle, or red squadron triangle. In this case, white squadron triangle. So yeah, it looks plausible, basically, and which also helps to give visual interest to the model. And I'm also going to paint the hull number on the top of the turret to aid in visual identification, from the air, that is. Normally this would be a national marking or something like that, but given this is a Battletech miniature and I'm not even sure if I want to represent a faction, I don't feel the need to attempt one of the chevrons. Though if anybody knows where you can get appropriate transfers, I'd appreciate it. Let me know in the comments below. So, I felt like adding a bit more detail to the model because it's already looking pretty samey even with the unit markings on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some red on the veins along the barrels of the PPCs. I assume this represents some sort of like cooling material or something like that. And the red also nicely contrasts with the green on the model, which, you know, gives it a little more visual interest. So pretty fancy, not really going to bother to highlight it. I'm just going to pick out the veins and the tips of the muzzle brake to just get that different colour. Alright, now we're ready to begin the washing phase. Well, prepare it for the washing phase. So to start with, we want to establish a gloss coat, and for this, rather than using a my usual Vallejo gloss varnish, I'm just going to get out my trusty bottle of floor polish, my gloss finish extra shine, and I'm going to give the model an even coat of the stuff. Now, this may look like you're ruining your paint job, but what you're in fact doing is protecting the model from the enamel layer which is to come. And I do warn you that enamel products are very hard on acrylic paint, so you definitely want to protect your work. So just a single even coat should be enough, and if you have excess, remember to remove any pooling with your brush before you finally set it to dry. And for bonus points, cover this with a plastic container or something, just to keep dust from settling on the gloss varnish and therefore, you know, getting sealed into the model that way. Okay, now we are ready to apply our wash. So to start with, we've got our MIG product, which is basically an enamel wash. We're using a brown in this case. And we are going to just throw it on in a fairly laissez-faire manner. Now, brown is a fairly reasonable color to choose because it more or less shades everything. Yeah, so let's just throw it on. And we've also got some thinner on standby. That bottle I use to clean my brush. So with enamel products, you cannot use water. You have to use mineral turpentine or ideally Artist's Odorless Thinner. It's much easier on the nose. So yeah, just providing even cover like that. Don't worry about the fact that it looks like a bit of a mess right now. And then, yeah, you've basically finished the application stage of the wash, and then we'll discover that the unique property of enamel washes is they can be removed, which is what makes them incredibly useful in the scale modeling world for gradually building up and removing layers of weathering on a model. Okay, so now we are ready to remove, and you'll notice that even just with my finger, because I've only waited about 24 hours for this to dry, so it's still just a bit wet, especially on the uppermost surfaces. But this is good, because then now, even at this state, we can start buffing off the majority of the wash, and leaving the deepest recesses still fully painted the wash color. Now, I'm just using my rough rag to remove this layer. And as you can see, we're already starting to achieve the effect of a washed vehicle, and you didn't have to pin wash it by hand or anything time consuming and arduous like that. So for doing lots of miniatures quickly, this would definitely be the way to do it. And since at this scale you rely on large armies to make a visually interesting game on the tabletop, I definitely recommend this way for this scale. So we're using a cotton bud here to get into some of the harder to reach areas where the wash should be removed, but our singlet rather, couldn't quite reach. So you will end up going through a lot of cotton buds because, well, they tend to not endure the process very well and tend to pick up lots of wash very rapidly. So feel free to swap out cotton buds as much as you need to do. And there we have it. We have our fully shaded miniature ready to go. Now, for this stage, I don't actually recommend doing what I've done because I didn't fully let the wash cure as much as I should have, and I ended up reactivating some of the wash just with my matte varnish here. But this stage is essential for continuing the paint job. So the idea here is we want to basically kill the gloss that the floor polish put on the model, and to do that we need to put down a layer of matte. I definitely recommend that you use a very thin down mix through an airbrush or testers if you are not worried about the cancer warnings on that come with that product. So yeah, just do a very thin layer, try and make sure it doesn't activate the enamel wash, and watch it as it dries to prevent the wash itself from pooling, because one thing you will notice about this product is that when it starts to pool, it'll form these ugly white spots which do not look good. If they start to form when they dry, get a damp brush and then just run it over the model until these damp spots disappear. Okay, we are on to our final dry brush. So I generally do this stage for all vehicles, either at the 15mm scale or smaller. You'll notice that I attempt to do a dry brush layer, but I'm mostly out of my color for this. I use Vallejo model color dark sand, and I try to do just a general dry brush over the entire model to tie all of the colors together and give a sense of weathering to the model, that it's actually gone through the field, it's been coated with a layer of dust, and that the paint is starting to fade. So you'll notice that I don't have enough paint, didn't quite get enough paint together, so we're not really getting any on the first pass, but now we are on the second that I've fully charged up my brush properly. So you'll notice that the paint job looks a lot dustier, and that we're starting to bring out some of the detail on the model and make the tank look like it's, weathered and been through the field at least a couple of times. Okay, so we are almost just about done. Once this layer is done, it's pretty much the final stage of the model. You can dismount the model from your painting stand and get it ready. Bonus points, you can magnetize the model, though I wouldn't recommend it for models this cheap, especially 3D printed. And here we have our finished tank. This is what it looks like up close, but bearing in mind you're probably going to be looking at it from a significantly larger distance, and it looks impressive to see a whole squadron of these things on the tabletop, and when you batch paint them you can get them done quickly. Anyway, I've also got coming up, I've got some examples of some other camouflage schemes you can use. I hope this helps, and happy painting. See you later.